cloud. All right, everybody. Welcome to, I think it's week 12 of our HPC user training, where we're going to look at cloud computing on the Microsoft Azure cloud. Paul Yu is our cloud solution architect specialist, and he's done some training with SDSC students for different projects. So he'll talk about using the Azure dashboard, how to get things set up, how to track your spending, and how to launch a VM. And we'll talk about two kinds of VMs. There's the free kind that gets you on and get you started. And then there's the HPC kind, which costs money, and they're not inexpensive. So when you get your default account, you have about $100. I'd like you to try and use some of that to run Hello MPI, Hello World, kind of simple examples. And I'll post the links to those previous weeks where we covered MPI and we covered OpenMP. Either one of those, just to get on there and get that experience of what a $3 an hour system costs and how quickly it is easily burnt through. So with that, I'll let Paul present. Thank you, Paul.
All right, thank you. And hi, everybody. As Mary mentioned, my name is Paul Yu. I am a Azure Cloud Solution Architect. Based in the Los Angeles area, my role is to really work with other higher ed institutions, kind of onboard into Azure. Just learn the platform in general. If you have a cool solution that you're thinking about and you need help with some architecture design, that's kind of my role. And so I support a lot of higher eds pretty much up and down the West Coast, and support a lot of the UC campuses. And so happy to be here, and very thankful that Mary has invited me to come back and speak to the SDSC community around some of the capabilities that we offer in Azure around HPC. So if you guys can all still see my screen, let me just kind of go through what I would like to cover today. So today I really want to kind of give you that brief overview, the introduction into Azure, talk about some fundamental concepts around Azure, and then talk about the shared responsibility model, because although this is like compute in the cloud, and you can you literally have access to all these services, they're all at your fingertips, but there is a certain level of responsibility that both Microsoft and Azure will take care of on your behalf, but then there's also some things that you as the end user should also be doing to also protect yourself. So I want to make sure that we're all in alignment in terms of what you would be responsible for, because the last thing that I would want is for somebody to kind of like spin up a virtual machine that's completely open to the public internet that hackers can kind of get into. So we just want to make sure that you're deploying it in a safe and secure manner. And then I'll just briefly talk about some of the different services that we offer around HPC on Azure, and then we can walk around through the portal and I can give you a tour. And at that point, I mean, feel free, if you have your account, you can kind of click along and all that stuff. And also, I'll just make sure that you guys have a pretty solid foundation to work with, especially around the Azure portal and just being able to navigate that, okay? So before I begin here, is everybody here relatively like new to Azure? You can feel free to drop in a quick note, yes or no, in the chat. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, new to Azure, awesome. New to Azure, okay, great. So then let me kind of keep it moving then. If you already had experience with Azure, I wouldn't want to bore you with this stuff, but this is, I think it's good stuff to go through. So let me hop over to the next slide here. There we go. Okay, so what is Azure? Azure is basically a cloud computing platform, right? If you have worked with AWS in the past, you're going to find a lot of similarities between the two clouds, right? At the basic core of it all, though, down at this bottom layer here, you are going to get, I guess, the fundamental building blocks, right? So whenever I think of Azure, I just think of it as just a bunch of different services that you can piece together to build your solution, your innovative solution. And so I think of all these little components in Azure just like Lego blocks, right? And so, if you've ever played with Legos, there's basic blocks, and then there's also those fancy blocks that you can tack on to build your nice solution. And so the basic building blocks that we have down here, it always boils down to compute, networking, and storage, right? So those are the fundamental pieces of Azure. And in the HPC perspective, that's kind of what you ultimately need, right? So you probably need, higher end compute or higher end networking, but it's going to boil down to these three services. And so we definitely offer other um, services that don't require you to manage any infrastructure or anything like that. So things like serverless technologies like Azure Functions, right? So if you've worked in the AWS realm, they have like Lambda functions, right? So it's just a place where you can write your little bit of code and host it on Azure infrastructure, not even worry about the infrastructure at all. Just bring your code there, it'll run, right? So these are like the building blocks of Azure. And then we'll just talk a little bit about what's supported on Azure. One interesting fact about Azure is that nowadays, I think the number is definitely more than 50% of the compute in Azure is not Windows. It's mostly Linux workloads. So we have more Linux workloads in Azure than we do Windows these days. And so the point is that Azure is a platform that works with all of your favorite tooling, right? So you see a lot of logos here. And so if you've worked with any of this stuff, or if you want to bring your additional tools, I mean, it's all going to be supported on Azure, okay? And then, of course, Azure is pretty popular especially within the enterprise space. And so just by getting that exposure to Microsoft Azure now, I believe it's going to help you in the future as you, venture off and start to do, some of the cool stuff at some of these big, huge Fortune 500 companies and whatnot. Okay. I'll just quickly glance over this. So this number has gone up. So Azure is global, right? We operate in, I think the number is like 60 now, or maybe a little bit over 60. So we operate in, well over 50 regions across the globe, right? And so you can see those little dots splattered across the globe here. These are all the regions that we operate in. And the neat thing about Azure is we're basically our own ISP as well. And so we have fiber lines that connect all these regions together, and we operate all of that, right? So global connectivity, definitely priority number one, and just being available in across the globe. Okay, Azure is also secure. We employ a decent amount of people that all they do is just protect Azure, right? Because not only do we offer Azure for our end customers, but Microsoft actually hosts their own infrastructure in Azure nowadays, right? So whenever you use like things like Office 365, Xbox Live, anything like that, that's all hosted in Azure. And so we have a team that's dedicated to protecting Azure from the bad actors, right? And one cool tidbit is that I'm pretty sure it's publicly known, but we also have a red and a blue team that basically they just work to hack each other, right? So one is there to hack, the other one's there to protect, and so security is definitely one of the more important things on Microsoft's mind. And so we want to make sure that our customers are comfortable with having their compute and their data in our cloud. Okay. With that regard, Azure is also a compliant cloud, right? So in terms of regulatory compliances, this is just a small an ever-growing list of all the different compliance offerings that we provide to our end customers, right? And so if you're doing research work like HIPAA high trust workloads, or if you're doing government DoD funded workloads that may require CMMC or NIST 800 type compliance, that is coming down the pipe. And so these are all the different regulatory compliances that we will help you adhere to, right? And we say help because it is a shared responsibility model. I did talk about this. So yeah, we have 2 million lines of fiber. And so these are here that Microsoft laid down. So we have a transatlantic fiber and all sorts of other cool things in place that will help connect all the regions together. And so anytime you're in the Microsoft network, and if you have a virtual machine in, let's say, United States, and you want to connect it to a virtual machine over in East Asia, that connectivity, it happens all on the Microsoft backbone. So it never goes out to the public internet. It all stays within the Microsoft backbone, and you get the low latency connection there. Okay. That's kind of high-level overview of what Microsoft Azure is. The next thing I want to do is just talk about some key fundamental elements that I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about, okay? One of the biggest things about Azure is its identity platform, okay? In this day and age in the cloud, we can no longer rely on the network from securing us, okay? When you're on campus or in the office or what have you, you have that bit of security barrier, right? Called the network, right? As long as you're inside the network, you can pretty much be rest assured that your data is going to stay within the network unless you want it to go out. But that network boundary is basically starting to diminish a little bit as you start to move your workloads into the cloud, right? And so that identity becomes extremely critical in securing your workloads. And so we built Azure on top of the Azure Active Directory platform, and this is basically the identity store for all things Microsoft. Okay, so if you're logging into Office 365 or if you're logging into Azure, you're basically using the same identity store. And this is like one of the big things about the Azure for Students, right? That link that Mary pointed out. She says, hey, if you go to this link and if you're a UCSD student, you can use your Active Directory credentials, right? And that's because UCSD as a campus, has these identities in Active Directory, which also provides you with potentially Office 365 resources, but then also Azure resources. So if you go and sign up and if you log in, we'll know who you are and we'll know that you're affiliated with the UCSD entity, right? So aside from the identity piece, the other thing that becomes super important is subscriptions, the notion of a subscription. If you've done any work in the Amazon AWS world, I think their equivalent of a subscription would be like an account. And so a subscription is your billing boundary for the resources that you deploy, right? So without a subscription, you can't do anything. Well, without identity, can't do anything either. But to do any work in Azure, you're going to need, number one, your identity, and number two, a subscription. Once you have those two things, you can log in, view your subscription, and then you can start deploying resources into your subscription. Okay, and like I said, that becomes your billing boundary. That also can act as a security boundary as well, right? When you sign up for your Azure for Students subscription, that will be your subscription and yours only. You can invite other people into your subscription if you wanted to, but by default, it's default deny. It's your subscription. You only have access to it. You can choose to invite others into it if you wanted to. Okay, and that goes into the next slide, which I'll start from the bottom here, which boils down to identity and access management, right? So I said when you create the subscription, it's your subscription only. You can choose to invite people. And so once others are invited into your subscription, you can then use what we call role-based access control, or if you ever hear me say RBAC, that's what I'm referring to. So role-based access control is the mechanism by which you can give or take away permissions for other users, okay? And this becomes especially important when you work as a team, right? Because not everybody works on an island by themselves all the time. A lot of times you have to collaborate with others. Take the student cluster competition, for example, a couple of months ago at SDSC. There was a team that all had access to a single subscription, and you had to, number one, make sure that you can grant that proper permissions to that user. And so there's a couple of different areas that you can scope down permissions to. Generally, you scope them at subscriptions, but you can also scope permissions down at resource groups, which I'll talk about, and then down at the individual resource level. Management groups in your situation, I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's more of a central IT type management function. But in your case, just know that you can scope down by subscription and then resource groups and then the resource, okay? Now, you're probably wondering, what's a resource group? So a resource group is just a logical container. So you have a subscription, and let's say you're getting ready to deploy a virtual machine. When you deploy the virtual machine, it's going to ask you what resource group you want to put it into. You can't deploy anything without a resource group, so that'll be number one. And then that just becomes your logical container. Just kind of think of it like a box, you know, like this is my HPC project or my Open API project, and you know it's a resource group container, and then you deploy the things that you want to work with, like a storage account will go in there, a virtual machine will go in there, maybe a virtual network will go in there, right? And so this allows you to manage that group as a single entity, right? So if you want to invite your teammate or your classmate into this project, then you can give them access to that resource group, right? And you can have multiple resource groups. There's a one subscription, many resource group type of relationship, right? So, and so these are just, you know, create resource groups as you go. I like to separate them by projects. And so you can grant access or permissions to one single resource group, and that's all they'll have access to, even though you have more resource groups behind, you know, in your subscription. But that's just one way to do it. And then, of course, when you're done with that resource group, you can delete the resource group, just the resource group, and then it'll delete everything in it. So it becomes an easy way to kind of manage all the different resources that go in there, right? Because when you spin up a virtual machine, which I will walk through, you'll see that it's more than just a virtual machine that goes into all that. There's like 4 different services or resources that get deployed along with that, okay? The next fundamental thing that I want you to be aware of is, and I know a lot of times this virtual networking can it can be a little overwhelming to look at, but I feel like you have to understand a little bit about virtual networking in order to do anything in the cloud, right? Because it's always going to boil down to networking one way or another, okay? So a virtual network is basically, how should I put this? Take, for example, your home internet, right? Your home internet is, you probably work with a company, whether it's a cable company or a phone line company, and they provide you your internet access, right? And so you get this router that they provide you, and the internet is coming from the outside into your home, okay? From that point, your internet is now available to other devices in your home, and that becomes your home network, right? Nothing from the outside can really come in. Like if you have your iPad connected to your home network, there isn't um, a way for somebody malicious just to come and log into your iPad, right? Because it's on a what we would call a virtual network. It's like a secure private network space just for your devices within your area. So just take that concept, and that's kind of how it is in the cloud as well, right? So a virtual network is basically it's going to be a network comprised of private IP spacing, right? So the 192.168, that's typically the address space for inside of your home network. And so we support all these different address ranges for virtual networking in Azure. And so you can define that. So any 10 dot address all the way up to 10.255, and any 172.16 address up to 172.31. And then of course the 192.168. So we support all of these internal networks. Basically, what that will do is you define your virtual network, and then you can start to deploy virtual machines into that virtual network, and then they can all kind of communicate with each other. Okay. By default, nothing from the outside could come in. It could go out, right? So it can go outbound to the public internet if it wanted to, but by default, that's going to be a secured network. Nothing from the outside can come in unless you allow that to come in, right? And so that's kind of the point that I want to make, is that I want to make sure that you're deploying this stuff in a safe manner, and that nothing from the outside can really come in without your I guess your approval, or you know, making sure that you have all of the right configs in place. Okay. So don't worry too much about this address spacing. Azure will help you. If you don't know the address, it'll just kind of pre-fill it and just kind of take the defaults. If you're not communicating with other virtual networks, then it won't be a problem. If you want to try to connect virtual networks together, then you have to make sure that you're planning the address space very well. But yeah, that's kind of what that is here. Okay, and then the concept of a network security group. This is like a firewall that you can put on your virtual network that can either permit or deny traffic, right? So you can whitelist certain IPs to come in, or you can say, no, you can't come in, okay? So those are probably the most important things that we can probably consider, especially when we're deploying virtual machines, right? So Azure, the way you interface with Azure, we definitely don't have any shortage of options here, okay? A lot of different ways you can talk to Azure and get your resources deployed in Azure. Number one, probably the easiest way to do it is just through the Azure portal or the Azure dashboard or Azure console. I mean, whatever you want to call it. That portal is available at portal.azure.com, and that's where we will be going to today. And that's where you can kind of point and click and say, hey, I want this virtual machine. You know, I want it this size. I want this image, things of that nature. Okay. There's also this concept of Azure Resource Manager templates, which is basically a JSON file with declarative information on what you want your deployment to look like. And you can submit that template to the Azure Resource Manager, and it'll take that declarative instruction and make that deployment on your behalf, okay? Under the covers, as you're working through the Azure portal and you're pointing and clicking and filling in text boxes, what that is doing under the covers is it's actually building the JSON template for you. And then once you hit the button saying, hey, go create it, it's actually gonna convert all of your configuration that you just input on the web browser. It's gonna convert that to a JSON template and submit it to Azure Resource Manager on your behalf, okay? The other bit here is you can also work with Azure using command line, right, or CLI, okay? And we support all the languages, right? The two that come to mind here are Azure PowerShell. So if you're familiar with PowerShell, you're comfortable with that, you can actually use PowerShell to submit deployments into Azure. We also have what we call the Azure CLI, or the Azure Command Line interface, and it's I think it's a little less verbose than PowerShell. I think it's a little bit easier to work with, but again, this is just my opinion. Okay, so those are the two different flavors. So PowerShell, obviously, you can use it on a Windows machine. CLI is cross-platform, so you can use CLI on either Windows, Linux, Mac. Doesn't matter. It's a cross-platform language, and that's another reason why I tend to lean towards CLI. Okay, this other thing that I have down here called Cloud Shell. This is a pretty neat feature of the Azure portal. The Azure portal will actually allow you to open up a terminal, and we call it the Cloud Shell, and allows you to work command line right in your browser. So rather than downloading tools and installing them on your local machine, if you're more comfortable using command line and you don't want to download tools on your machine, you can actually use the Cloud Shell. Okay, and then of course we have our REST APIs. That's basically, I guess, one of the more basic levels that you can interact with Azure is using REST API. So making all these RESTful calls gets a little challenging to set up, but know that it's there. And then of course we have third-party DevOps tools as well. Things like Terraform, which is extremely popular with organizations, especially the organizations that want to work in multiple clouds, right? So Terraform is a single domain-specific language. It's consistent across all clouds, and so you know, you can just learn one language and kind of deploy to them all. And then of course there's Ansible, and then Python, and I mean, you name it. The list just goes on and on and on around what you can deploy into. Okay. The next bit that I really wanted to focus on is just have a quick talk about the kinds of services that you can deploy in Azure, right? And I did say at the most basic level, it's always going to boil down to compute, network, and storage, right? And so when you deploy these type of services, you're going to start to hear, as you work more and more in the cloud space, you're going to hear a couple terms. You're going to hear IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, and that's basically saying, hey, we'll provide you the compute platform. You can bring your OS, bring your applications, and you know, your server will basically be in Azure, right? So it's like your data center in the cloud, right? The next level, it's a higher level of service that we offer, and this is also referred to as PaaS, or platform as a service. And this is what I was talking about, the serverless components, right? It's not, the term is coined serverless, but there are servers in the background. It's just less servers, right? So less servers for you to manage. And so it's just a higher level of abstraction there, where you can just literally just bring your code. You don't even need to bring your OS, just bring your code to Azure and we'll run it for you, okay? So these are the things like managed databases or Azure functions, logic apps, things like that is PaaS. And then the next higher level of service that cloud vendors will offer is what you call SaaS, or software as a service, right? And this literally is, don't even bring your code to Azure or code to Microsoft. It's literally just bring your data, right? And then we'll host everything else for you. And you could think of services like Office 365 is one, right? Because it's a software solution. You just bring your tenant, you bring your users, and then boom, you're off to the races. You can use the Office 365 platform. Okay, so those are the different levels of services that we offer. And so just in comparing these, right, with IaaS, it's gonna give you the most amount of flexibility because all we do is just provide you the compute, the server, and you have to do everything else. PaaS will be more focused on the application, and then SaaS is more focused on just bring your data, right? And so just staying on this theme, there's this whole concept of the shared responsibility model, right? And so because you get more flexibility with infrastructure as a service, that also means that there's more responsibility on your end, right? So you are going to be responsible for um, the virtual machine itself, the operating system, right? Making sure that it's patched, making sure that you are plugging any of the security vulnerabilities on that. Um, Microsoft will take care of the underlying components, like the rack that it's in, making sure that the server is actually physically locked in a room that nobody can get into, making sure that the hypervisor is up to performance. But everything else in green, this is stuff that you're responsible for. And then as we move to the right, you can see that platform as a service, we start to take care of more of that stuff for you. So in platform as a service, we'll take care of the operating system. We'll take care of the runtime. All you need to do is just bring your code, and so you'll be responsible for your code only. And then over here in the software as a service, you're just responsible for your data. We'll take care of the rest. Okay. So that at a high level is kind of what Azure is all about, what it can bring to the table. Let me just pause there for a second. Is there any questions so far? If not, I can keep going. Okay, so the next bit that I want to jump into at a pretty high level is just talking about what we can offer in terms of HPC on Azure, right? Um, and so there's a lot of different things that come with HPC, and a couple different objectives that you want to um, accomplish. And so again, it always boils down to the basic needs, right? So compute, network, storage, okay? In terms of compute, we do offer, and we'll start to get into some of these SKUs a little bit, but there are specialized hardware that we offer in Azure that allow you to do the work that you need to do in a very optimal fashion. And so we have these optimized compute virtual machine SKUs, and you'll start to notice as we do more and more work in Azure, our our VMs, they have SKUs, right? So just like any other store, when you walk into a store, there's SKUs for different products. And so the H series and the N series, these are typically used in the high performance computing environments. H series are really good for like InfiniBand and things like that. The N series, this is generally where our GPU-based virtual machines are. And so you'll start to learn the SKUs a little bit as you progress through. And then in terms of like high performance storage, we offer things like HPC cache or Azure NetApp files. And NetApp files is, we have a partnership with NetApp, and basically NetApp comes into the Azure data centers and actually deploys their hardware into our data centers, and that's where that partnership is. And then, fast networking, we have ExpressRoute and InfiniBand, and then we also have services that offer workload orchestration, such as virtual machine scale sets, Azure Batch, and then of course, Azure Cycle Cloud, with Cycle Cloud being one of the more predominantly used services in Azure. It's actually the service that the SDSC the student cluster competition team was using. Okay. let me see. Let me just jump around a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about some of the optimized compute SKUs. Okay. So I did mention that you'll start to notice letters behind our virtual machine SKUs, and you can quickly identify, what's what. And so this slide does a pretty good job here. Let's just start from the bottom. A and B series virtual machines, these are probably the most cost-effective virtual machine SKUs that we have out there. They're burstable VMs. The B series you'll find in this Azure for Students offer, I think we give you about a couple hundred hours of free burstable VM. When you want to get into the more general purpose virtual machines, just standard compute, you'll notice that the SKUs will start with a D, E, or F. And then the higher memory SKUs will start with a L or M. And then we also have listed down here kind of like M is extreme memory, L is high SSD or high IOPS, right? And then these two SKUs up here, which will be more, I guess, ideal for you all is the H and the N series, right? And so HB, I think the HB V2 may be something that you want to target for your open MPI exercise. So this is a high memory bandwidth virtual machine. Both of these do come with InfiniBand already preloaded, pre-configured on those virtual machine images, okay? When we talk about the GPU-based compute, you'll see that now we're diving into not only just the one-letter series, but now we're diving into a two-letter series. So NV, V is more for like the visualization. So if you need to perform any visualization activities, just go with the NV SKUs. If you need anything for like deep learning or anything like that, you can go with the ND SKU, okay? Just a couple quick facts here. I'm not going to sit on this one too long, but these are just the generally what they would be capable of. So in terms of like an NCV3, you get a V100 NVIDIA card on that. And like I said, they all come with the Azure network and InfiniBand included with that. Okay, let's see. I just want to jump over to and talk about some of the orchestration pieces a little bit. So workload orchestration, because I think this is kind of a big deal in the HPC space, right? Because you ultimately would submit jobs, those jobs get distributed or routed out to different machines. And so we do have a couple of different ways that you can do that. And number one, that would be through what we call a virtual machine scale set. And the scale set is basically like you provision a service, you tell it how many it can burst up to, and it'll just start making identical copies of itself so that it can run your job, right? So this is literally just a collection of virtual machines that just kind of auto scale. So it's elastic. It can scale up or it can scale down based on your workload, based on the CPU that's being emitted by all these jobs, and it can scale up to meet that demand, okay? As far as other workload orchestrations go, we do have Azure Batch. Azure Batch would be kind of considered more on the PaaS side, okay? The platform as a service, where you would write your script or your job, and you would submit that job. So you provision an Azure Batch service, you tell it, what sort of compute you want, and then you write your job, and then you submit that job to Azure Batch, and then Azure Batch will just take care of, spinning up the compute, doing the work, and then spinning it all back down for you. Okay, so that's more of a HPC as a service, right? Where you don't really have to worry too much about the infrastructure. And then we also have Azure Cycle Cloud, which I said is a hugely popular service, right? But Azure Cycle Cloud is a little bit more on the infrastructure as a service side, because here you have to kind of worry about some of the networking components. You have to, if you have a specialized image, you can actually bring that. Actually, you can bring it to both. Yeah, you can bring it to both. But this is more of like it works with your traditional cluster orchestration tools. So things like Slurm or Grid Engine or things like that. If you're accustomed to using that in an on-campus environment, doing this in Azure will seem pretty seamless for you all. And so this service is here, and you can actually use this service to extend your on-prem HPC cluster into Azure, right? So that's a possibility. Okay. Let's see, what else can I talk about? Okay, I think this is more just kind of going to the details about Azure Batch capabilities versus Azure Cycle Cloud capabilities, right? And I think at a high level, that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you all. The other thing I wanted to demo is I wanted to make sure that I spent enough time. What are we time check right now? I wanted to spend some time kind of driving around in the Azure portal and kind of showing, kind of how to navigate, because I think navigation is the number one important thing, is just understanding how to move around there, right? So I want to demo the portal for you all, and then I also want to leave you with some of these learning paths. And so I will take these links and I will drop them into the chat window. And as I'm doing that, feel free to shoot any questions you may have up until this point. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So I will jump right into the Azure portal. And feel free, I mean, you can click along as I go. And I'll try to go a little slow. All right, let's see. I'll put the resolution a little bit. And you guys can still all see my screen, right?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay. I'm not sure if the link, I noticed you had a special UCSD link. I'm not sure where that exactly drops you into, but this here just talks about the whole Azure for Students program. And basically what happens is you get $100 in Azure credits to be used over a 12-month period. And cool thing is, for as long as you're a student, you get this benefit every year. And so if you sign up right now, and if you're a student next year, once you're getting close to the 12-month mark, we'll send you an email and say, hey, you're coming up on your 12 months. Do you want to renew it? And so you get this benefit for every year that you're a student. So go ahead and click that apply now button. You will have to authenticate using your ucsd.edu email address. And hopefully it won't be very painful on the process. I've already done this part. So if you hit the apply now link, you do get, you do have to, verify and things like that. So let's see. I see a question here. Once the job execution is complete, do we get notification? What job notification are you referring to? Is this a question around Cycle Cloud or Azure Batch or? or the sign up process, HPC. I see. Do you get a notification in Azure? I would say not all notifications are built into the platform natively. However, there is definitely a mechanism by which you can create a notification, right? And so Azure has this thing called Azure Monitor or Azure Activity Monitor. And so we log everything that's going on in the platform. We will log that into the platform. And then what you can do is you can actually create an alert off of that. So if you are doing this job multiple times and you want to be alerted each time it is done, you can actually create an alert rule that will send you a notification as services complete or as things change within the Azure platform. Okay, hopefully that answered the question. Perfect. Okay, so I would say go ahead and submit the application for Azure for Students. I did want to show, not that. I think it was this one. Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of what you get for free, right? So you get $100 credit to use within 12 months. Plus free services, right? So you do get ML workspaces for free. Obviously, you can use Visual Studio Code for free. I think that would, I mean, that's just, I don't know why they listed it here. It's free for everybody. Oh, here, Linux virtual machine. So you do get 750 hours for free. And this is the B1S SKU. So you have to really pay attention to the SKU that you are deploying. And so you do get an allocation of 750 hours here. I mean, I think it'll be good for, I mean, especially if you're like learning Linux and you just want a virtual machine that you want to spin up real quick, you get 750 hours over there. If you want to learn Azure functions, you do get, what is this, 1 million? You get 1 million free requests per month on that. And then all these other services that you can basically use for free. Anything outside of this list over here, you are gonna get deducted from your $100 allowance. And one way to kind of check that balance is to kind of come over here, and I will drop this link into the chat window because I think this is going to be one of the more important things that you can do is understand how much money you have left, right? So you do have to be signed up for the Azure for Students. And the Azure for Students program, technically it's a sponsorship. Not sure why that is, but behind the scenes, from a Microsoft Azure perspective, you're not going to see cost as you would if you're an enterprise or just a normal paying customer, pay-as-you-go customer. The cost reporting gets put into a special place, and again, this is just for Azure sponsorships. And so when we're talking about Azure for Students, or as what Mary mentioned, Microsoft at times would offer free research grant money based on the project. And so that comes through as a sponsorship. And so this is the only place right now that you can view your sponsorship balance, right? And so I can see here how long I've been active for, what's my total credit, how much I have remaining. And then over here in the usage area, this is where I can get very detailed reports around, you know, what services I have used, how much did that service cost me, and things like that. So once it loads, there we go. So then, of course, you get pretty simple controls here. Just a date picker. and nothing special there. So then I can refresh. Looks like I spent 2 cents. I wonder what I spent. That cost me 2 cents. And so you can click into the subscription. See. So I can see that there was a storage. There was a little piece of data stored somewhere in one of my storage accounts that cost me 2 cents. And then, of course, you could download this and it comes over as a CSV and things of that nature. So this portal is going to be your friend in understanding what your balance, what you spent on so far, and things of that nature. Okay. So bookmark that. When it comes to the Azure portal, I have a regular Azure account, but I also have a Azure for Student account as well through another institution that I'm involved with. And so I just wanted to kind of show you or give you the lay of the land here in terms of the way Microsoft lays things out, okay? So let me just start off with this top bar over here. Starting from the right, this is where you can kind of see your account information, view your account, switch directory. So we have this concept of directory, like Active Directory. And so I can be a member of multiple directories. You know, if I were to be invited, yeah, I can be invited to someone else's directory. And if I am invited to another directory, I can actually switch here. And I don't have any directories right now, but I can actually use that button to switch, and then I can just be in the context of another institution's directory if I wanted to. So that's what that is. The other thing I want to go over, and I'll just go from right to left here. If you run into any problems with Azure, nope, that's not it. It's this button right here, the question mark. This is where you could come for help. If you are finding that you are stuck or you feel something is broken, you can come here to the help and support, and you can submit a support ticket. Azure support is free. And obviously you don't have to pay for anything. And so it may take a little while for the support rep to get back to you, but the support rep will get back to you, okay? Here, portal settings, this is pretty important. I myself, I like everything in dark mode, so I think this is probably the one of the most important settings you can make over here. But for the purposes of this demo, I'll just keep everything in the normal mode. And so you can make some, somebody said, yes, dark mode, absolutely. You can change the portal, tweak the portal to your liking, okay? You can change your default view, whether you want this homepage view, which is what I see here in the middle, or the dashboard view, or you can change the default mode of the portal menu. The portal menu is over here, right? So it's underneath this hamburger button, and watch this. So the only way I can view this is I'll have to click here. And so you have the option to dock it if you wanted to, and I'll just keep it docked for now, okay? But if you want it out of the way, you can just set fly out, okay? Let's have it docked. Okay, notification area. As you start to deploy resources, spin up a virtual machine, submit it for deployment, you're gonna see this thing kind of like spinning, not really spinning, but you'll see like a bar here that kind of indicates to you that, hey, Azure's doing work for you. And so whenever it's done, it will let you know that your service is done, and it'll let you know over here, okay? This is a little bit different than let's say your job is done running, because that's more of an application thing from your job run. But this will notify you from the Azure control plane perspective. So if you're submitting, if you're provisioning resources, if you're deleting resources, we'll let you know over here, okay? This button over here is basically the same thing as this switch directory. So this is your directory switcher. And then this guy right here that looks like a little terminal, this is exactly that. It is the Cloud Shell that I was referring to earlier. And so it's trying to load. When you hit this button, the Cloud Shell terminal will come up. If this is the first time that you are running a Cloud Shell, it's going to ask you where you want that storage account to live. And that's probably where my 2 cents is. So it does require a storage account on the back end in order to use the Cloud Shell. And I'll show you why if I expand that. So you see that little button right here. So I can expand that. And let me show you. If I open the editor, so this little 2 curly braces over here, this becomes my editor. Okay. And so this looks like a very simple VS Code layout. And so that 2 cents is actually over here in my cloud drive. And I can actually store files in my cloud drive. There's a lot of tools that come with Cloud Shell. So I think Git is already in here. Terraform is already in here. Should be. Oh no, Terraform doesn't like 2 dashes. I think Terraform is just, okay, maybe not. Oh, there it is. Yep, yeah. So you do get a lot of tools kind of baked in, and then you can store files over here. I don't recommend you store files here, but you can. And if you want to edit files, quickly edit files, you can use this, okay? So let me just close the editor because I am done with, no, don't save. Okay, and then over here in the Cloud Shell, I am running Bash, but you can, if you're more comfortable with PowerShell, feel free to jump over here and switch it over to PowerShell. Okay, so done with that. And then up here in the search bar, here's where you can kind of come search for services. So if I want to go find where that storage account that's costing me 2 cents, because I want to save money, I can just, you see what I did? I just went into the search bar and just typed in storage, and I see all of my storage accounts. And so I have 2 storage accounts, and you can see I can start to navigate into the storage account and start to work with it. Okay. Let's see. Let's talk about subscription real quick. So I just went into the search bar and I've found this subscription in the past. So any recent services that I have visited, it'll list it over here. And so I've done a search for subscriptions in the past, and all I do is just click this here. And so here I have access to 2 subscriptions, okay? We talked about role-based access control, right? And we talked about being able to invite folks into subscriptions. And so what you can do is over here in access control. So you'll start to notice all the different services when they come up and open like this. We call these blades in Azure. And so you'll start to notice that the layout of the menu, especially near the top of the menu, it's always the same. You're always going to see overview, activity log, and access control. And access control is where you come to, number 1, view access, and also add access, okay? So if you want to share this with somebody else, I can come here, I can select a role. So I can say, hey, I want somebody to be a contributor, and I can just pick any one of these people that's in my directory, and I can share this with them, and they can then see my resource when they log into their Azure portal, okay? And so, like I said, if you share the entire subscription, they can see everything in your subscription. If you only want to share just the resource group, then you can do that too, okay? All right, so that's the search bar. This menu, right, I docked it, so I have it here. This allows you to organize your favorites. And these are some of your, I think this comes out of the box like this. This is what Azure just gives you. And so if if I don't want to see load balancers, like if you say, hey, I don't really care about load balancers, I don't want load balancers taking up room in my favorites because I want other stuff in there, you can actually highlight this, and then you see that little star that's highlighted. You can click that, it'll actually get rid of it, and now it's no longer here in my favorites. And so if you have other services that you visit more often than others, you can actually go to all services over here, and then you can actually search for the service that you're most interested in. So let's just say, we talked about Cycle Cloud, so let's just Cycle, I'm not seeing it. Azure Cycle Cloud, anybody see it? I don't see it, but let me just pick any one of these. I'll just pick one. I'll just pick one. Let me just pick Azure Cache for Redis. Okay, I'll just pick a random one. So when you hover over that service, you'll see that this kind of thing pops up. What you can do is if you hit this star, it's going to actually pop it to the bottom of my favorites list here. So if I just hover over this and I hit the star, boom, my Azure Cache for Redis is now down here. And then you can kind of sort it. So this is probably one of my more important services. I can move it up in the list. Okay, so that becomes a really handy way of navigating around. Okay. Azure Advisor is an awesome place to go. It'll give you good recommendations on in terms of like cost and security and reliability. I don't have anything deployed, so it has no recommendations for me. It says I'm actually running really good. But this is a great place to come. Again, help and support, and then cost management and billing. Again, this is the area that most folks will come to if they're using a Azure paid subscription. Okay, in your case, you are using a sponsorship subscription, and so it will notify you. It'll say, hey, this is a sponsorship, you need to go over here. Okay, and this will take you back. It should take you back to that other page that I showed you. Okay, we'll just let that, yeah, this is the exact same page. Okay, all right, so from a portal navigation perspective, that's where we're at. I don't like the fly out in the way because I want more real estate. And so let me walk you through what the experience is like creating a virtual machine, okay? So let's just say I logged into the Azure portal for the first time, and I come to this home page, okay? Let's say I want to create a resource. There's a ton of different ways to create a resource in Azure. Probably the easiest way is just to come to the home page and you see this big button that says create a resource. So you can click that button. It'll take you to this menu, and it's going to ask you what resource, right? And then you see popular resources. Let's see, what was for free again? Yeah, the Linux server. So let me go spin up a free Linux server. So I'll choose Ubuntu 18.04. Okay, and then it'll basically put me into a wizard to kind of fill out all the different components that go into provisioning this service. And so it's going to ask you, hey, what subscription do you want to deploy this to? I'll just select my first one, and then what resource group you want to deploy this to, right? Because we talked about resource group being a container for your resources. And so I don't like what I'm seeing here. I want to create a new one. So I'll just create a new one, and I will call it RG free compute. That's just what I'll call it. The name is totally arbitrary. You can name it whatever you want. You can name it unicorns or whatever you feel meets that criteria. One thing that I would highly advise you to do is, especially in a large scale deployment where you have tons and tons of resources, it's always good to come up with some sort of naming convention on how you want to name your machines. And so if you notice what I did here is I just put a RG in front of it that kind of indicates to me that it's a resource group, okay? And so I will create that resource group, and then I will pick a virtual machine name, my free VM. How about that? So my free VM will be the name of my virtual machine, and then I can pick what region I want to deploy into, right? And we saw that large list of regions. And so we have a lot of regions here, but I want to pick West US 2. You'll notice that there's two West US options. So there is West US and then West US 2, okay? The difference is West US is up in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and then West US 2 is up in the Washington area. In terms of like performance, you're not gonna see a huge difference in terms of latency. So my recommendation is always to just deploy into West US 2. It's just a bigger region, right? So we're talking about real estate here because you know, this stuff is actually in a data center somewhere, and so it's just a bigger, larger region in West US 2 than it is in West US. Okay. In terms of availability options, you can make your deployment highly available. Obviously, that comes with a price, right? Because if you want highly available, that means you want more of these virtual machines. And so I want to keep costs down. And so I will choose no infrastructure redundancy. I will stick to this image. And then the size here, we talked about SKUs a little bit. And we see here, this is a D series. And so we know this is like a general purpose virtual machine. Cool thing is it gives you a price, $70 a month, okay? You can see with the $100 budget, this will be gone in no time, right? Less time to play. So what I'll do is, we talked about this, and what did we say? We said that the B1S standard tier, you get about 750 hours. And so I will, these are the recommended sizes. And so I'll just click down here for all sizes. And it should give me some extra ones. And B1S, let me just make sure. Nope, wrong tab. B1S, yep, okay. So B1S is what I want because that's what's free. So I will select it to highlight, and then I will hit this button to actually select it. And so now I get a B1S, 1 vCPU, 1 gig of memory. Not the most powerful machine out there, but hey, we are getting a free machine to work on, okay? You do have the option for authentication type. You can go password or you can go SSH public key. It's always good practice to use your SSH public key pair. So let me go grab mine. Yeah, I think that's it. So let me go grab my public key and username. I'll just call it, yeah, you know what? I'll just leave it at Azure user, okay? Use existing public key is what I will choose. So I'll do that. And then it's going to say, hey, paste in your public key over here. I will do that. Here are some important decisions that you need to make, okay? Public inbound ports, okay? Right now, because I don't have any way of connecting into a virtual network securely, I want to allow a public port on a public IP so that I can just use the internet to access my virtual machine. In an enterprise setting, in a secure research setting, this is not going to fly in terms of compliance. But for the purposes of this demo, I will do this. But just know that it's always best practice to not expose anything network-wise on your machine. So I will allow port 22 because that's what I'm going to do to connect to it. And I will go over to next. The OS disk, you have the option to choose your OS disk, free account eligible. I like that word free, so let me just choose that. OS disk type, just know here that we have standard HDD, standard SSD, and premium SSD. There's a question here, how many cores is one vCPU equivalent to 1 core? So 1-to-1 ratio there. I will go with the cheaper option here in terms of OS disk. I'll just use a HDD. And then here, we'll go into the networking. And this is the part where I said, could get a little confusing, but Azure does the hard work for you. And it'll say, hey, it's going to create a new VNet for me. It's going to create a new subnet for me, and it's going to use this address space. It just picks one, right? And so you can just run with the defaults for now. Once you get into larger deployments where things need to start talking to each other from different VNets, then you'll have to do some pretty, you'll have to do appropriate planning. But here, I'm just in a localized virtual network with one virtual machine, so it doesn't really matter what my network space is. So I'll just run with the defaults. Network security group, I will choose basic, and then I'll walk over how to configure network security groups in a minute. Public inbound ports, yep, I will stick with that. And then if I go to management, I want to show you this. This is going to be extremely helpful for you all in terms of saving costs, okay? We have this feature called Enable Auto Shutdown, okay? What happens is it's easy to spin up a virtual machine and it's easy to forget about that it's running, right? If it's running, the meter's running. And for as long as the meter's running, then your balance goes down, right? So in order to kind of protect myself, because I also forget, I will enable auto shutdown and I'll shut it down at a specific time. So let me just pick Pacific time, notification. And so this here pretty much guarantees that the virtual machine will be shut down every day at 8 p.m. If it's running. I'll try to be good about shutting it down early, but I'll put that in just as a safeguard. Okay. And this is advanced features. We won't worry about that. We won't worry about tags for now, and I'll get over to review and create. Okay. Haha, see, it's warning me down here. It says, hey, you have SSH open to the internet. You know, that's kind of a no-no. So, but I'll show you how to secure that even more. It's my only way in now, but I can actually secure this a little bit to make sure that only I can access it. Okay. Let's see. I will go ahead and create. So it passed the validation. So it's basically inspecting my JSON template, making sure everything is good, making sure it can be submitted. And so I will hit create. And it will submit. And now you see here my notification icon. It indicates to me that Azure's working. And so if I click that, let me just close these. it's submitting my deployment. And so if I click this link around my deployment, oh, it just took me here already. Good. Kind of shows me that this is doing work. Okay, so we'll just give this a little bit of time. It doesn't take a terrible amount of time to deploy, especially a Linux virtual machine. All right. Okay, should be wrapping up really shortly.
While we're waiting, you might elaborate on Marco's very good question, which is that a virtual CPU is actually a thread on a core using hyper-threading, correct? On the Azure VMs. It's what they do on Amazon, for example.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize their scaling is impacted by how that's architected. So virtual CPU means they've taken advantage of the fact that on modern CPUs, the threading they go hyper-threading. They support at least 2 threads. And so you actually are getting 1 thread on 1 core of 1 virtual CPU, 1 CPU.
Yeah.
Oh, you have a machine.
All right, yeah. So I have a machine.
Yay.
And I have a public IP address, okay? So now theoretically, if anybody knew this IP address, they can try to attack my machine or even attempt to log into it. Obviously, they can't get in because I secured that using my SSH key pair. But if I had like a password protected virtual machine, they can just brute force the password and try to attack it. And so what I would do to further lock this down is I will go into networking on my machine and I will go right here. Actually, no, here. So you see how it has this little warning sign, SSH. This is kind of warning saying, hey, you have SSH open. Source is any. Okay, so that's the big part. Anybody could come and try to log into this. So what you can do to further lock this down is I can click that rule and I can scope this down to just my IP address. And so if I do, what's my IP? Not that IP. I want a IPv4 address here. This is my IP. If I jump over here. So if I scope it down here, this is basically saying I will only allow traffic from my IP address, no one else. Okay, so then I will save that, and it's updating the security rule. And so if I go copy this public IP address, see, so now the source is updated. There might be one more IP that I need to allow, and that's just because I'm on a company VPN, but let's see if this is gonna work. So let me bring over my terminal. And if I do SSH, what did I, Azure user at that IP? Yes. There we go. Now I am in my free VM. Okay. That's
Yay,
basically
good
it.
job.
Yeah. Yeah. And then from there, you can kind of, this is your machine. One thing that I would say is that sometimes you can look to shut down a virtual machine from inside, inside the OS. like Windows, for example, you know, if you have a Windows virtual machine and you go to start shutdown, if you do that from inside the OS, your meter is going to still run. So don't shut down from inside the OS. You need to shut down from the portal. And so when you shut down from the portal, it's actually going to deallocate the machine off the hypervisor, and then your meter will stop at that point. Okay. All right. Any questions? I do see one question. Is that just a convenient way to modify the IP tables on the machine? What is a firewall? Yeah, so that rule that I put in, it's not actually on the machine. It's actually out in front of the machine. So it's on Azure. So Azure will block it before it even gets to the machine. So that's just a benefit because you're getting this additional layer of security around the VM. And so any firewall rules that you would need to make, the recommendation would be to make it out on Azure. And so it'll stop it before it even gets anywhere near your machine. Okay. So that's all I had. That's all I wanted to show you today. Sorry, I don't think I left you very much time, Mary. I think you
No,
had.
I was going to ask you to show them how to launch a HPC system, but
Yeah,
if
it's
there's
the,
time.
yeah, I can show you. It's the exact same process as we did. So you're just going to come here, create a resource. And then, do you know what OS you would be launching that on?
I think CentOS would be fine.
Okay, so then let me, rather than choosing one of these, right? Because these are like the popular
Yeah, Ubuntu. I
services.
mean, I think any of the HPC. So let's just use Ubuntu because it's right there for
Okay,
the students. And
okay.
when you show them, when you pick that
Mm-hmm.
Ubuntu along with the right SKU,
Yeah,
they end up with a system where the HPC software is installed.
yeah.
That's the main thing I want to show them.
Okay. So let's
It
see.
won't just be a simple one core or half a core VM.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So so I'll just create a new resource group because this is where I want to put it in. My HPC VM. So I will create a new virtual machine with a new name. The image, let's see, we can actually pick all sorts of images. So the SKU, the virtual machine SKU is one thing, but the virtual machine images are another. So I'm just curious. I haven't done this. Is there? Haha. See. So you can actually
Yeah.
go out to the marketplace, and there are virtual machines images that are published by either Microsoft or partners. And so, they'll just publish their images out to this marketplace that you can take advantage of. And so, companies like NVIDIA or this is a Microsoft thing here. We will publish images. There's also a Cycle Cloud out here.
Do you want to briefly explain what an image is?
Yeah, so an image is a pre-packaged version of an operating system and all the other components and maybe even a little bit of configuration, mostly generic configuration. So it's basically like just an OS package that you can create your virtual machine on top of, right? So in the previous example, I just picked a plain vanilla Ubuntu server. It's no different than going out to Ubuntu yourself and downloading the OS and then running it on your own machine. Here in this case, we have publishers like NVIDIA or CentOS or, actually this is Desktop Studio AG. We have different companies that will pre-package their OS and then publish it to the marketplace so that they can be utilized. There's a question on here around what comes in the HPC pack. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head. I'll have to Google search that. But we definitely do publish HPC pack VM image. Is this just for creating? If this doesn't have it, I will search for HPC pack. Usually we list all the different software that come along with it. But I'll dig that up and I'll send that as a follow-up. Okay. But yeah, you can definitely choose one. And let's see, I will go back. So that's the image marketplace. So I'll just run with this one for now. We did talk about size, right? And so the last time around, I just picked the free tier, but you can actually collapse these and then you can start to see, I don't see the H.
Yeah, they're not
Group by series.
showing up.
So sometimes what happens is, yeah, you see that? Insufficient quota. I think we ran into this last time.
One.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
no.
because we're on a free sponsorship account, the Azure for Students, they limit on the amount of SKUs that you can.
Well, that's not a bad SKU, the HB 120. Not bad, but it's at least parallel HPC.
Yeah.
Oh, look how much it costs.
2,600 bucks a month. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, but that's for the whole month. You wouldn't get charged the whole month.
Right.
You'd still get charged by the hourly usage, right?
That's correct, because we do micro billing. Yeah. And you actually billed, I can't remember. I think it's billed by the second when you actually boil it down. It's yeah, all the way up to the second that the compute is up and running for. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't do anything more than that. Probably would require a higher level subscription than the Azure for Students subscription. No, this is the cost per month. Somebody put.
Yeah, that's like $350, $360 an hour, I think.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a big parallel. That's interesting that we can't get the less expensive ones. They really don't want us to use it.
Possibly so. It could also be because they're reserving it for the paid customers. Yeah.
So what would normally show up there, guys, is a whole lot of choices, and we're working on getting some additional subscription for everybody, but it might take some days to work out.
Yeah. And let me see. I'm just going to jump to my other Azure subscription that has a little bit more or much less restrictions. So this is actually in my Microsoft tenant. Let me just do this. I won't create it. I'll just test. Sizes. This is where I wanted to come to. Okay, so what was that size? It was a HB. Okay, they don't want me to use it either.
Can you just put in HPC for the size? Is that?
No, it has to.
Wow.
It has to go by the SKU. So looks like they're really limiting.
Yeah, there's other SKUs. Maybe we're just.
Insufficient quota, regional limit, no, size not available, promo SKUs. Um,
Azure VMs.
yeah, so these are all limited, insufficient to deploy.
Can you
So
see HC or just the, I'm looking, there's HB, HBV, HC.
HC, there's a HC here. One
All
thing
right, well,
that,
live demos
yeah,
don't always go right, do they? Wow.
yeah, especially with this sort of SKU.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to Keith about the subscription to make sure we get that set up right.
One thing that you can try, and I remember the team having to go through this for the competition, is you can go through the support and you can request. I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try this on my student account.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
remember this?
Yeah, the support people were awesome during the competition. So
Yeah, so you can actually come here and submit a new support request, and then on the issue type, you can say service and subscription limits and quotas, and I can select my subscription. Uh, there you go. They stopped me right here. I said, no, sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
This happens.
Yeah, looks like we'll have to do some work behind the scenes to see if there's any way to get some access to these
Yeah.
higher level SKUs.
Yeah, we'll keep you guys updated. We thought it would be more straightforward getting it configured to use a real parallel computer.
Hmm.
But if we get that solved, we're working with another colleague of Paul's
Yeah,
who's responsible for research allocations. And so I'm trying to work that out with him even today while he's on vacation. So I'm going to leave him alone for the rest of the weekend. If you guys get a chance to at least launch a virtual VM, that'd be great. And next week with Rob Fatlin from the University of Washington, Rob's going to show you how to use the serverless functions for scientific computing, which are free as well.
oh yeah.
So please try to activate whatever Microsoft account you can through the 2 links that I gave you. And then get that $100 free subscription, but you shouldn't use it. But do be very careful, and if you start anything, do make sure you shut it down.
Yeah.
The reporting that Paul showed you on how much you've spent, my experience is that all cloud computing services, they take some time to tell you and report what you've spent, unless Microsoft has made some big changes. It could be overnight that you find out, oops, I spent this much money and it's still a delayed incurred expense. So be really cautious with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does take
Yeah,
a little bit for the charges to
it
register.
does. Yes, it does. But we don't know why. And they're trying to work on that, but it's a pretty complicated system that they've got.
Yeah. And so I'm stopping my virtual machine now, and you can see the status here is running. And so this will change to stopped or deallocated. Okay. Outside of that, any other questions?
No, Marco. Paul, there's a question from Marco about the payment. And I don't think that's correct,
Yeah,
but
I
I'll
think
let you speak.
we addressed that. It was 2,000 per month. So that's assuming that you're running it 24/7. That's not the micro billing price.
Yeah, this is just pay as you go. But that would
Right.
be if you used it for 30 days times 24 hours a day.
That's correct.
Instead, you should think about the hourly price, which for
Hmm.
the 120 core HPC system, which is the AMD EPYC ARM system, it's about $3 or more an hour.
Mhm.
So, and if you were doing this for a project like in the real world with a boss that wants you to stand up a service, you wouldn't do pay as you go. You would get a monthly lease, or you would get a annual lease. You would get a longer term lease and then bring the price way down.
Mhm. Yeah.
So be careful how you use it for the class. I just want you guys to have the experience.
Right.
And somebody asked about the HPC pack. The software stack, if you buy an image that's associated with in my experience, a high performance computing system, it already has the MPI, OpenMP libraries. If you get the GPUs, you would get a GPU image, which can be based on Ubuntu if you want, and it would have the GPU libraries for you to run CUDA and things like that. So you can find out ahead of time. It should be you should be able to do that once you pick an image, but it's going to have parallel computing images, and they also configure the cluster with a scheduler. The Slurm scheduler comes built in and installed, which is really nice. So you don't have to do all of that. And your file transfer, SSH and SCP, those are all installed for you as well.
Right. I also wanted to share, I think I shared this in the link earlier, but I would say just go through this Microsoft Learn module. It's completely free. And we do talk about Azure Batch and the HPC instances and the HPC pack.
Paul, could you repost that link? Some people came late.
Yeah.
And so they might not get that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, any questions from people or thoughts? I don't guess so. So you guys are, Paul, thank you for your time. I'll shut down the recording now. We really appreciate it. And
Yeah, no
the
worries.
students have somewhere to go back and recheck and take a look at what you presented.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, if any other questions arise, feel free to reach out, and I'll ping Keith when he gets back to see if there's anything that